having that desire to go and preach and mentor. We were picking up in Acts chapter 22, verse 30. So Paul having that desire to go and teach and mentor to his fellow Jews, just as he was a Jew of Jews, as he pointed out, a Pharisee of Pharisees. Yet he was so zealous, but at the same time so wrong. He wanted to go to his brothers and say, hey guys, yes, you've got the basis of it, but you're kind of going off in the wrong direction. Here's where you should be going. And I understand that desire, but that's not what that's not what God had laid out for Paul. God had laid out for Paul that Paul is to go to the Gentiles. And Paul kept on going towards the Jews, going back and back and back. So he's got this desire. And he eventually ends up in Jerusalem. And his Christian brothers in Jerusalem turn around and say, hey, the Jews are pretty upset with you because you are leading people away from the law, and you're putting the law down, saying it's not necessary to be circumcised, it's not necessary to keep the law. So why don't you go into the temple, take a purification vow, take 4 nice Jewish boys that are Christian with you, have them take the purification vow and put on a show and tell, and everybody can see that you're a nice Jewish boy, and that way we'll appease the Jewish boys. It kind of backfired. Because what happened is they seized him on the last day. They took him before the Roman. Well, they were actually going to try him and then put him to death. But the Roman guard saw that there was another riot breaking out. They were up in the Roman Fort Antonius, which looks down over the temple. They came down. They grabbed him. They pulled him out. They did bind him, which was against the Roman law. They were going to flog him, and then Paul spoke up and he said, hold on a second, I'm a Roman. So at that point, the guy that's in charge of this garrison, he turns around and he questions Paul, finds out that he is a Roman, and then allows Paul to have an audience with these Jews in the temple again. Paul starts speaking to them, and literally just chaos breaks out again. Another riot on this guy's hands. So they pull him back out of there, and they pull him back into the fort, and they keep him there. So verse 30 now. So the next day, because he wanted to know for certain why he was accused by the Jews, he released him from his bonds and commanded the chief priests and all their council to appear, and he brought Paul down and set him before them. So this guy who's in charge, Claudius Lucius, he brings Paul down and he summons the Sanhedrin and also their little henchmen. That's a group of 70 people that they're talking about. So he has Paul up against 70. 23, then Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, men and brethren. That and brethren, that means Paul was a member of the Sanhedrin previously, okay? That's what it's alluding to. Otherwise, he would have turned around and said men and fathers. It would have been a respectful term, as in, you are my elders. He goes on, he says, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. So his conscience is clean. That's what he's telling him. And at that point, it says in verse 2, and the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. So Ananias took offense to the statement that Paul has lived in good conscience to God up until this day. So Paul, being a Christian and accepting Jesus Christ as the Messiah, Paul saying, my conscience is clean before God. And Ananias cannot accept this. And Ananias then instructs the guys that are standing closest to Paul to smack Paul in the mouth. Okay. Then verse 3, then Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. For you sit and judge me according to the law, and do you command me to be struck contrary to the wall? This whitewashed wall, it's plastered over. It's a plaster that they apply, and it's like lime over here, but it's white. And along the roads over there's a ton of tombs. Even today, you go along, there's tons of little tombs, and if you don't know what you're looking for, you won't even realize what they are. And some of the less expensive ones, the tomb stone that's in front is not carved like a disc. Okay, in the more expensive tombs, the doors will be probably about that high, and then in front of that, in the actual wall, the stone wall coming down. Okay, because this is carved into the rock. Okay, there'll be a channel over here, and that channel is probably about yay wide. It's got a little lip on the front, and there's a channel, and it runs slightly uphill. The stone that they put in front of there, that tombstone, right? That tombstone is being chiseled off at the back, so it's flat, and it's flat in the front, and then it's round. And what happens is you can put a pole underneath it, and you can lever it up, put a wedge, put the lever in, put a wedge, and you can kind of roll this stone up this little grade. That's how you open the tomb. When you want to close the tomb, pull the stone out, the wedge out, the thing rolls back, okay? The angels that rolled that tombstone away of Jesus' tomb, did it give the weight? I think it did not. But you're talking literally minimally thousands of pounds, okay? Because I mean, you're talking a large rock. So on the cheaper tombs, they don't go to all that hassle. They just, you've got a little bit of a hole inside, you put the bones inside and roll up a rock and you're done. The problem is if you are walking along and you touch that tombstone, you've now come in contact with the dead, you're now defiled, you can't go into the temple. So what they would do is they'd come now and they'd plaster the rock. They'd put a plaster coating over the rock, which was white. And that would show you that was a tomb. So what Paul is saying to this guy is, hey, hold on a second. You got all your fancy robes on and everything, but you're nothing more than that plastered rock that signifies death inside. Your whitewashed tomb. You contain death. You're unclean. Not what you expect Paul would say to the leading church leaders of the time. And then he goes on and he says to them, okay, so you're going to judge me according to the law, but then you want to strike me against the law, because they didn't have legal standing in order to do that, okay? So, verse 4, and those who stood by said, do you revile God's high priest? Now, the law also says there that you are supposed to be in subjection to the high priest, because God has put that man in that position, right? So they've kind of got Paul over a barrel on this one, in the sense of, okay, you say you in subjection to God and you stand in good conscience to God, but here you are going against a man that God has placed in authority. So what now? Verse 5, then Paul said, I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. So Paul is quoting that exact verse, saying I shouldn't speak ill of a ruler. But at the same time, what he's saying, I'm looking at you, I'm seeing a whitewashed tombstone, you're obviously not, and I don't recognize you as the ruler of the people. That's what he's calling him out to be. So from this, you can not just assume, but what he's getting at is not all rulers in a church are rulers chosen by God. And unless that person is ordained by God and stuck there in that position by God, is he truly a ruler? And that I think speaks heavily in this day and age. Now, as one gets older in years, you normally get a little less clumsy. Happy birthday, Miss Lacey. It's a beautiful shade of scarlet you're wearing this morning. Verse 6. But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other part were Pharisees, he cried out in the council, men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged. So here again, Paul is going to play on exactly what he did previously, and he's going to divide these guys and then conquer. So the Pharisees were all about the law, and they had no problem with the resurrection. Okay, so that's why during Jesus' ministry, you'll see it's the Pharisees that attack Jesus all the time, because they're coming against him according to the law. You're breaking the Sabbath law. You're not doing this. You're not doing that. But after Jesus' death, the Pharisees stop combating the way. It's the Sadducees that now pick it up and start coming against him, because the Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection. Easy to remember? Sad-U-C, because they don't believe in the resurrection. That's how I remember it anyway. So at this point, when he says that, he's going to divide this group of Pharisees, the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is the ruling council, and it's made up of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and your scribes, which are your lawyers. Okay, that's basically what a scribe refers to back then. So verse 7, and when he said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For the Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, and no angel or spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. So that just gives you a rundown of exactly what their belief situation was, and Paul just throws a wedge in between this whole thing. Now here's the thing. Jesus upset both parties. He upset both the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So that's why both of these parties now are still against this. I don't want to call it Christianity, because it wasn't really Christianity in these days. This was another sect that was arising, another Jewish sect. That's how they were looking at it. Judaism didn't comprise of just Judaism in those days. Here you've got Pharisees and Sadducees. Then underneath that you've got there's Hellenists, there's Greeks. So you've got these different Jewish believers that are from different ethnic groups. And then in amongst that, you've also got now different rabbis that have come up over time, and they've got their spin on it. So now you've got different groups that now move towards and follow different rabbis. Okay, Jesus came along. He was a rabbi. He was a teacher. So under Judaism and what was going on in this day, they were saying, oh, well, there's a rabbi and a bunch of people are following him. John the Baptist. They looked at John the Baptist as a teacher, as a rabbi. He had disciples following him. So there's a sect which they referred to as the guys that were baptizing. Okay. Then you've got Jesus comes along. That's another sect. What is he professing? He's professing there that you love the Lord with all your heart. Therefore, you've covered the law. Don't go with all the law. And he's also talking about resurrection. So, and the crux of his ministry and what he was professing was love your neighbor, look after those that are in need. So they just viewed it as a different sect. Okay, so now you'll see both of these now are after this new sect or this new movement. Okay, verse 8. Then there arose a loud outcry, and the scribes of the Pharisees' party arose and protested, saying, we find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God. This to me amazes me. So Paul stands up and he drives a wedge between the two, and now these two are fighting against each other, and the one's defending Paul. These guys will come together when if an outsider comes against, say, Judaism, these two sects will come together and they'll stone that person to death. But when they've got nothing to fight about, then they'll fight with each other. That's basically what happens. So here they're defending Paul, okay? Verse 10. Now when there arose a great dissension, the commander, fearing lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from amongst them and bring them into the barracks. So again, chaos is breaking out. This poor guy, Claudius Lysidius, he must be sitting there thinking, what the heck are these guys arguing about? Because from a Roman perspective, we got many gods. You guys are arguing over the same God, but there's a slight differentiation. But yet the two parties that are arguing have got differences, and now you're arguing against the third guy who's got a slightly different variation. What's going on? Why is there a riot? Why are you guys wanting to kill each other over it? Because that's literally what they wanted to do. They wanted to kill him, right? Just kind of like differences in our churches today. It's amazing. Somebody that's not from our church walks through the door, and what do we want to do? We want to throw stones. Yeah. Verse 11. But the following night, the Lord stood by him, and he said, be of good cheer, Paul. For as you've testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness in Rome. Man, Paul's lucky I'm not God. I would have come down to Paul that night and I would have said, see, you didn't want to listen when I told you not to go to Jerusalem. Now forget about Rome, you're not going. I'll get somebody else to do the work. But this is the compassion.
Why you're not going.
Exactly. But this is just the compassion and long suffering of God. We mess up again and again and again. And you come back straight back to God, and He's there. He's got His arms open wide. Tell me something. How's the penny thing going? The penny.
I lost all mine the first day.
That's a good thing, and I'll tell you why. Because, and I'm going to clarify second service more about these pennies. But for me, first day, I was good. Second day, I was good, and I came to Shell. I said to Shell, man, it's amazing. I got all my pennies. It's just amazing what God has done. And then yesterday I woke up. I might as well just taken the whole lot and dumped it in there.
Shopping at Walmart got me. I had not spent one penny. I don't even know how many I have to put in there for that, because it was really not, it was very negative.
Now, may I share a little bit about what she said off? Okay, so Miss Sandra comes to me afterwards and she says, I was kind of chuckling about this penny story. And because negativity is not something that I deal with.
I'm not usually a negative person. I'm always trying to cheer somebody up.
And then you get this statement. I love it, but we'll get into the pennies later on. There's a verse there that says, and it's one of my life verses, and it says there, be careful, for where you think you're strong, there you will fall.
Mm-hmm. Always.
Oh man. So, okay. Back to Acts, verse 11. So this Claudius pulls him back into the barracks to protect him, because he thinks with this riot they're going to kill him and lynch him on the spot or stone him to death. Verse 11. But the following night the Lord stood by him, and he said, be of good cheer, Paul, for as you've testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear a witness in Rome. God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. God said that to him in the beginning. You're going to end up going to the Gentiles, and now we're going to send you off to the Gentiles. Verse 12. And when it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under the oath, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. What these guys are saying is, either Paul's going to die or we're going to die. That's the bottom line. Verse 13. Now, there were more than 40 who had formed this conspiracy. They came to the chief priests and the elders, and they said, we have bound ourselves under a great oath, that we will eat nothing until we have killed Paul. Now you, therefore, together with the council, suggest to the commander that he, Paul, be brought down to you tomorrow, as though you were going to make further inquiries concerning him. But we are ready to kill him before he comes near. Verse 16, so when Paul's sister's son heard of their ambush, he went and he entered the barracks and he told Paul. That there is called a coincidence. God miraculously has this young man who just happens to be Paul's sister's son, his nephew. If you operate on the mathematical probability of something, what is the mathematical probability? You take the amount of people that were in that area at the time. You take the amount of seconds in that day and put that specific person at that specific time in that specific place. What's the mathematical probability of that happening? I mean, you must be dealing with millions or billions to one. Coincidence? Mm-hmm. Then Paul called one of the centurions to him and he said, take this young man to the commander, for he has something to tell him. So he took him and he brought him to the commander, and he said, Paul the prisoner called me to him and asked me to bring this young man to you. He has something to say to you. So now the young man is simply going to get audience with the commander. So verse 19, then the commander took him by the hand and went aside, and he asked him privately, what is it that you have to tell me? This commander, he's obviously pretty perplexed, and he's also got he's kind of in the middle of a quandary here, because if he doesn't settle the uprising down, it's going to be his neck. Okay, Rome has already sent word to Jerusalem, and they've been sending it for a while now. You've got to keep this mob under control, because they just couldn't get a handle on the Jews. Okay, verse 20, and he said, the Jews have agreed to ask that you bring down Paul to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire more fully about him, but do not yield to them, for more than 40 of them lie in wait for him, men who bound themselves by an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready waiting for the promise from you. So in other words, hey, they're going to come and ask you to send Paul to get re-examined. Don't do it, because here's this plot. Verse 22. So the commander let the young man depart and commanded him, tell no one that you've revealed these things to me. This young guy has told Paul and has now told the commander in private. The chances that he's going to go and get to see Paul again are probably slim to none. But yet at the same time, this commander is telling him, okay, don't go and tell anybody. What's the chance here that the commander will go back on his word, or actually not even act on this word, but send Paul there anyway? Paul gets killed, end of story. But here, there's it's almost like there's a leap of faith. I mean, if I was this young guy and I was worried about my Uncle Paul, I'd be shooting my mouth off all around town, trying to make it happen. And that's with me, and probably with you as well. You come up against a problem, and then you sit and you pray. The moment you finish praying, what do? You try and find a solution, as in opposed to, okay, I've prayed about it, Lord, now it's in your hands, and we immediately jump in and start messing up. One of the things that I like about construction is when I get a phone call from a wife and they say to me, do you do this kind of work or that kind of work? Yeah, we'd like you to come and look at this project that we've got. And my husband tried to do it. To me, that's ka-ching, 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 because what it means is I've got to go there, undo what the husband did, the mess, and then I get to do it. So I get to charge double. And that's the same with God and us. I'll pray about it, and then I'll take upon my husband role and try to fix it, and then God's going to come in and undo the fix, and then fix the mess. And I kind of wonder, Lord, why is it taking so long? Verse 23. So now this is this commander that we've been talking about, Claudius. And verse 23. So Claudius, he called for 2 centurions. Interesting, 2 centurions. A centurion is the leader of 600 men. These are hardened fighting soldiers, these centurions. Okay, not 1, 2. Saying, prepare 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night, and provide mounts to set Paul on and bring him safely to Felix the governor. So Felix. Felix was previously a slave. He should not have been a governor. Okay, he was previously a slave. The reason that he is a governor is because his brother Paulus was a friend of Nero. And through that, he got Felix promoted from slavery into this governor's position. Now, if you take somebody that's not equipped for the position, if you take somebody that's a weak individual that's had a lifelong, say, of bullying and being put down, and you suddenly slap a sheriff's badge on him, you're going to end up with a dictator. You're going to end up with somebody that's really going to abuse that power. And this is what was happening with Felix. Felix, he was the governor, but he was making some crazy decisions, and his rulings were way over the top and harsh. And he was kind of, still trying to get over all the wrongs that were done to him as a slave. So this is who Paul's going to get sent down to. And you kind of wonder why would Claudius do this? Claudius, as well, like he said to Paul, he purchased his Roman citizenship, okay? So he is much the same as Felix. He's not a Roman, but now he's purchased that citizenship. Now he's in a position of authority. And it's almost like, okay, well, I can't fix this mess. I'm going to pass the buck right here. Now you're going to be saddled with this mess. I don't understand it. I can't deal with it. I can't get to the bottom of it. Now I'm going to throw it to you, like the hot potato syndrome. But look at the amount of guards and things that he gets together. Okay, he grabs 2 centurions, then he gets 200 soldiers, there's 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen. These spearmen they will carry that long spear, and they'll also carry those shields. Pretty amazing technology that the Romans came up with with how they use these spears and their shields, because all they do is they form a wall with these shields and have the spears going through them, and then they'd have the guys behind in the backing ranks, their spear shields would be raised up overhead, and it would basically form like a massive tortoise shell, and they could move through just about anything, and anything that was in front of them, well, it'd just get lanced as they were moving forward. There wasn't much that could get through.
You gotta compare it to a tank.
Yeah, early version of a tank, definitely. And so, I mean, he's going way overboard, I would think. But then again, it also tells you, I mean, from this, you've got to kind of read into it to kind of see this guy was facing the threat of death if he didn't sort out the problem. That's how volatile the situation is. Understand, Rome had conquered Israel. Rome had taken possession of all the priests' garments and their implements for the temple. They were rubbing it in their face, but they hadn't broken the back of Israel yet. And indeed they wouldn't. They would only come down in AD 70, and they'd come and annihilate the Jews. Between the time that Rome conquered them and AD 70, the Jews actually rise up on 3 different occasions and revolt and win. So these guys were not living as conquered people. And there was this constant tension going on, and yet Rome was sending down these leaders and saying, you better get control of the situation. So that's why you've got these vast numbers. Now, God speaks in verse 11 and says to Paul, hey, be of good cheer. And then he says, because you are going to go up to Rome, and then man plots, okay, we're going to take this vow, we're not going to eat until we kill Paul. And then the next thing we know, Paul's driving to Caesarea, which after that he's going to get onto a ship and he's going to go up to Rome. So this is the start of his voyage in a tank, basically. That's what it amounts to. So, I mean, God speaks, and boy, it's going to happen. So this this governor Felix, the Claudius, the leader down here in this in the Alexandria fortress, he writes him a letter, and he says to him, Claudius Lysias, to the most excellent governor Felix, greetings. This man, Paul, was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. That part is true. Coming with troops, I rescued him. Having learned that he was a Roman, he didn't learn that he was a Roman. He didn't know he was a Roman. He came down and he bound him. Now, if you bind somebody according to the Roman law, and the guy was a Roman, if you bind him without a trial, you are subject to imprisonment. No mention of that, okay? Verse 28. And when I wanted to know the reason they accused him, I brought him before their council. So I did the right thing. I've held an inquiry. Verse 29, I found out that he was accused concerning questions of their law, but had nothing charged against him deserving of death or chains. According to their law, the accusation was that he defiled the temple. Remember, they said he brought Gentiles into the temple, therefore he should be put to death. Verse 30, and when it was told me that the Jews lay in wait for the man, I sent him immediately to you, and also commanded his accusers to state before you the charges against him. Farewell. In other words, here, this is your hot potato, you deal with it. So he covers his back. Verse 31, then the soldiers, as they were commanded, took Paul, and they brought him by night to Antipatris. Antipatris is about halfway down to Caesarea, okay? So this is now the 3rd hour of the night, so 9 o'clock at night they depart, and they make this journey down there. Understand something, Israel is not huge by any means, okay? You can literally walk across Israel in a couple of days. So where they're traveling now, we're not talking about, going from here to California kind of thing.
No, it says about 30 miles.
There you go, okay. So, and this, they were on horseback, and then your ground troops, they would go at a light jog, okay? That's how they traveled, the Roman army, and they were known as the Lightning Brigade, that they could really move fast, okay? So verse 32, the next day they left the horsemen to go with him, and they returned to the barracks. So all these foot soldiers and spearmen and everything else, they're all returning, and Paul's going to carry on with I think it was 70 horsemen, and off they're going now. When they came to Caesarea and had delivered the letter to the governor, they also presented Paul to him. And when the governor had read it, he asked what province he was from. And when he understood that he was from Cilicia, he said, "I'll hear you when your accusers also have come." And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's praetorium. This is also, some of your Bibles will say, the judgment hall. And this is this praetorium. It's a palace, Herod's palace, and there's still remnants of it today. So Paul was stuck there, and he was put there now for the next 2 years. Okay, so what's happening now is Felix is now saying, "Okay, fine, we'll hold a full court when we get your accusers up here, and then we'll address this matter, and we're going to have a fair ruling." That's kind of what he prided himself on, that he was this educated person, and he was going to rule justly and fairly and all the rest of it. So Paul now gets a bit of R&R for the next 2 years. He's going to stay, and he's literally staying in the lap of luxury. And it's almost like, okay, God says, yeah, you are going to go. And it's funny, this, which is what I've been saying for a while now, where God leads, God provides, He equips those that He sends. All those little cliches that we use in the church circles, this is what we're seeing happening right here. So Paul gets an armed escort out of where he shouldn't be, in that troubled area. Now he gets stuck in a palace for 2 years. I mean, look at Paul, his mission so far. Every time he goes into town, he ends up getting beaten, stoned, or let down, out of a basket, and all sorts of things. I mean, just now he's sitting in a palace. Now that he's en route to where he's supposed to be going. Funny how different it is from when he was going in his own direction, in contrast to God's direction. And yet, why is it? Why is it when we decide to go our own way, God will bring about people, just like He did with Paul, to say, "Hey, you're going in the wrong direction. Oh, I'm not listening to that person. He's an unbeliever." Or, "I'm not going to listen to that person. He goes to the wrong church." And then things go wrong, and you bang your head against the wall, and you still bang your head and bang your... Why? There was a lady in South Africa. This is a true story. She came to my ex-wife and myself. She was a good friend of my ex-wife's. And she came to us literally about a week and a half or so before her wedding. And she said, just something's not right. Just something in my gut's not right. I'm just worried about this guy. And we were sitting there thinking, you think? You need to run. And we'd said a couple of things. And this guy was an alcoholic. And but she could fix him. And I've grown up with that. It stands out like a sore thumb to me. This is not good. Get away from it. So she asked for prayer, and a number of people were praying. The day before her wedding, she slips, she falls, she breaks her arm. She walks down the aisle the next day with her arm in a cast. And you kind of like, hold on a second. You ask for prayer and something happens. Is that just coincidence? Or should you just be stepping back a little bit and saying, hold on a second, Lord, okay, maybe I'll just postpone this a little bit. It didn't take long. It was probably about 8-9 months. And they went their separate ways. Totally. So, if things aren't going 100% correctly, have a look at it. So, here Paul, he's in the palace, and they're going to have a court session. Chapter 24. Now after 5 days, Ananias, the high priest, came down with the elders and a certain orator named Tertullus. Okay, Tertullus is the lawyer of lawyers in that area. Extremely well spoken. But he's a lawyer at the bottom. That's the bottom line. He's not one of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin could have elected to speak for themselves. They were, in a sense, the judge of the people. If you had a problem, you came to the church, and the church sorted it out for you. So they hire on this attorney. The other person that's mentioned here is Ananias. Ananias is the high priest. Ananias at this time has got a hate campaign on for Paul, second to none. Ananias at this time is 80 years old. He's making a 60-mile journey, not in a BMW, but on the back of either a horse or a mule. You can only imagine this guy's hatred for Paul. I mean, why? So, verse 2, and when he was called upon, Tertullus began his accusation, saying, now, this is interesting to me, because it's really the first detailed mention of lawyers, okay? Seeing that through you we enjoy great peace. So now he's addressing Felix. And he said the first things out of his mouth, we enjoy great peace. Under Felix? No. Everybody was living in fear under tyranny, okay? Because of the judgments that Felix was making. And prosperity? No. Felix was ripping everybody off. He was imposing taxes upon his own people and stealing from his own people, okay? Is being brought to this nation by your foresight. What foresight? He was a slave, uneducated. Verse 3, we accepted always and in all places, most noble Felix. He wasn't of noble birth, and yet accepted? No, they were kicking and screaming against the edicts that he was passing. With all thankfulness. Principle of first mention, remember that with dealing with attorneys. Oh man. Shell and I go out to go, and we're going to do a bid on a job. And whilst we're there, Shell's cringing at the back. Whilst we're there, it comes up that we were doing legal work in California, in family law and that, and this guy, his ears perk up, and he says, "Oh, really? So you're a lawyer?" And Shell pops up and says, "No, he's got integrity. He's not a lawyer. He's an LDA." The guy says, "Oh, I'm a lawyer." I love it. Oh man, when I fired my attorney back in California, I said to him, "You know the difference between a dead attorney in the road and a dead dog?" He looked at me and said, "No, there's skid marks in front of the dog." Verse 4, nevertheless,
That was bad.
I know it was. Verse 4, nevertheless, not to be tedious to you any further, I beg you to hear, by your courtesy, a few words from us. For we have found this man a plague or a pestilence. Some of your Bibles will read, a creator of dissension or a rebellion amongst all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. So here's this thing again about the sect, okay? That's how the Jewish people were viewing this. It's just a sect. And they were calling them the Nazarenes. The Nazarenes, why? Because Jesus of? Nazareth. Okay. Yet, where was he born? He was born in Bethlehem, right? Think about when Andrew went and called Nathanael. Andrew comes to Nathanael and says to Nathanael, "Hey, we found the Christ." He comes from Nazareth, and Nathanael turns around and says to him, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth or Nazareth?" That was it was a quote that he was quoting of the day, and it would be like
Appalachia here.
Yeah. But it would be a slur on that area. So that's what they were doing. So calling them a sect of the Nazarenes was basically a slur. That's quoting them from that region. Okay. So verse 6, he even tried to profane the temple, and we seized him, and we wanted to judge him according to our law. So the judge, he's just saying, we were just going to judge him. We were just going to have a little hearing. But under Jewish law, if they find you guilty of desecrating the temple, that's it, you get put to death immediately. Remember last time I said there was a sign hanging outside there saying that if you enter in there, it's by penalty of death if you're not a Jewish person or if you're unclean. So he's playing down all the facts, kind of like half-truths. A half-truth is a total lie. Verse 7, but the commander, Lysidius, came by and with great violence took him out of our hands. And it was no great violence. He was stopping the great violence. Verse 8, commanding his accusers to come to you. Commanding? He didn't command them at all. He simply took Paul up there, left him there, and it was Felix who now turns around and says, hey, okay, we're going to have a hearing. If you guys want to put forth your side, come up. It's amazing how this guy twists all the facts. If ever you've been in court or been party to a trial, the thing that amazes me is our legal fraternity, being educated people and being in the legal profession, are viewed by society as somebody to look up to and aspire to be as, educated, on, making right judgments. And yet, in my personal opinion and also experience, these guys lie through their teeth, left, right, and center. The law itself says there that an attorney has a legal obligation to make sure that the facts that he presents to the judge are correct. And if he knows that they're incorrect, he's then misinforming the judge. There's a law against that. In fact, the district attorney, they've ruled that if a lawyer is misrepresenting facts to the judge or misrepresenting evidence to the judge, it's a crime which the DA will prosecute. And yet what happens? Lawyer can go to the judge and lie through his teeth with impunity. Nothing happens.
If you enforce that, the courts would stop, because there's not any out there that don't do it.
Exactly. They would stop.
Yeah.
But hold on a second. The judge that we now have in that position is a lawyer.
Yeah.
They've stepped up. You going in, and it's a good old boys club. There are very few judges that sit behind that bench that actually take their oath seriously. And there are very, very, very few attorneys that I've come across that will actually stand by what they're supposed to do and make money.
A lot of the judges were lawyers first.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's that good old boys club. I tell you what, there's Bella, who's now been elected here. She's not a lawyer as such, but she's now holding the office as a judge. I take my hat off to that lady hugely. She was the court clerk there for many years, as you know. And she had said the day that she's got to hand out a same-sex marriage license, she will resign. The day that she had to do that, she resigned. And honestly, I take my hat off to that lady. I've got a huge amount of respect for her. Because to walk away from a really good, solid job based upon your principles.
She worked very hard to get.
Yeah, and she'd been there for many years. And I mean, she's got the wealth of information and knowledge and everything about that job. She can't apply that to anything else. And she walks away from that. I'm like, wow. And then the next minute you see her running for judge. And then she mentioned it the other night. She said, I really believe God has put me in this position. And here again, if you stand upon your principles, if you stand upon this word, I honestly believe God will honor it. Maybe not in the next 5 minutes, but He will honor it. Okay? So, carrying on with this lying rhetoric. So he then goes on and he says, by examining him yourself, you may ascertain all these things of which we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, maintaining that all these things were so. So the Jews that came with this whole thing and this party that traveled up there, they're all sitting there nodding and saying, It's funny though, because every time that they brought witnesses, which is according to the law, it says in the law, it says there, by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter needs to be ascertained. Okay, but every time that they bring these witnesses, this is now the Jewish church bringing witnesses. They brought them before Jesus, before the first guy that they stoned, the first martyr, Stephen. Paul had letters of witness, which he was going to go and apprehend Christians. So much for their witnesses. So now it's now handed over, and Paul's going to take the stand. Okay, so verse 10. Then Paul, after the governor had nodded to him to speak, answered. He says, inasmuch as I know that you have been for many years a judge of this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself, because you may ascertain that it is no more than 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem to worship. So Paul's saying, yeah, these guys have painted a very broad picture here. And they're saying, hey, I've been doing this for years and years, and look what I've done, and I've been stirring up the nation all over the place. He says, but hold on a second, this whole thing, including my trip up here, is only over the last 12 days. So Paul basically is now defending, and he's going through point by point by point, okay? Verse 12. And they neither found me in the temple, disputing with anyone, nor inciting the crowd, either in the synagogues or in the city. Now the accusation that they leveled against him, saying that he came in and he profaned the temple with bringing unclean people in. He said, you didn't catch me in the temple. You didn't bring that accusation against me when I walked into the temple. So, why now? Because it didn't happen. Verse 13, nor can they prove the things of which they now accuse me. Verse 14, but this I confess to you, that according to the way, now that's what they called themselves, okay, they call them, were referred to by the slur, the sect of the Nazarenes. But he says, no, the way, because that's what the early church was known as. And I'd suggest to you that is probably the more correct way to be known as, in the sense of not Christians, but rather as the way. I'll say this to you because Christianity is referred to 6 times in the Bible as the way, and it's referred to 3 times as Christians, but and there's 3 times it's normally as a slur. Go and check it out. And there's normally a problem attached to it when it's mentioning Christians. So it doesn't mention Christians in a nice tone, as it were, in the Bible. The term Christians was a term that the Romans devised, and it was a put down. Okay, little Christs. And just remember, Jesus had just been crucified on the cross. Anybody that's crucified on a tree or hung on a tree, as the law says, is an abomination. So it's a put down, and that's what was assigned to this this movement that was going on. Okay, called Christians. And again, the way, the Torah, the first 5 books, was referred to as the way, the truth, the life. That's what the Jews referred to it as. That's what they referred to those first 5 books. Exactly what Jesus turned around and said. He said, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. Okay? So, Paul says, yeah, number 1, I am a part of this movement which is called the way, which they call a sect. Okay? The word sect there is a heresy. A false form of Judaism. That's in a sense what they're saying. So I worship the God of my fathers. Second thing that I'm guilty of, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets. I believe everything that's in the Old Testament, as opposed to these whitewashed tombs here, which are used in the law to persecute me. Okay, that's the second thing I'm guilty of. Verse 15. I have hope in God, which they themselves also accept, that there will be a resurrection of the dead. Number 3, and I believe in the resurrection. That's a pretty bold statement even for us Christians. I'm part of the way. I believe what the scriptures say word for word, and my hope is in the fact that Jesus did rise from the grave. Therefore, that is my hope. Okay? So he's saying, and so his hope lies in that there is going to be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust. This being so, I myself always strive to have a conscience without offense towards God and men. That there, I think, should be something that's written on all of our hearts. That you do not offend God and men. So often we want to please man and then offend God. And in our zeal to represent God, we offend men. That's where we'll end for today.